Hello, everybody. Welcome to this webinar looking at using Belbin to form high-performing teams. We'll just give everybody a few seconds to come and join us. I know people are probably finishing their lunch or going to get another cup of tea as we speak. What we will be doing is over the next 40 minutes or so is talk about how you can use Belbin to form high-performing teams. This isn't going to be a definitive webinar. It's not going to be everything that you need to make your teams high performing or how to form that team in the first place. That would be a little bit ambitious. But what we are going to give you is some top tips and the ways in which Belbin can be used to help you when you are putting your teams together. So first of all, a few introductions. My name is Jo Keeler and I'm the Managing Director here at Belbin. My colleague Tracy is in the chat, so she will be there if you have any questions. If you did want to make this really interactive, that would be fantastic. So I believe there's just a comment button. You press that and please do put stuff in there and we will be able to help. Make sure that we join in. You will be sent a recording, but please do stay because that what makes it interactive and that's what makes it useful. So, quite a big subject, high-performing teams. Everybody seems to be talking about teams at the moment. We've only been doing it for 35 years. It feels like everybody's just sort of caught up, really, because that's what we do as a company at Belbin. We talk to teams, we talk about teams day in, day out. It is our reason for being. We're also the team company. We're the team company because we're now an employee ownership trust. What does that mean? Well, Belbin Associates was first founded, that's the right word, isn't it? Was founded 35 years ago by Dr. Meredith Belbin, his wife and boss, I'd just like to say, Eunice Belbin, OBE, and son Nigel Belbin. And they have grown Belbin and the reports and the brand and everything over the last 35 years, but have decided to retire. And I think that's fair. Meredith Belbin is now our patron at the age of 97. He's still involved to some extent. I'm actually going to have lunch with him on Thursday. But they decided they wanted to retire and they wanted to hand the business on. But they didn't want to sell out to people. They wanted to keep what they'd spent so many years growing and, feeling really passionate about. They didn't want to let it go. So they sold it to the company and we bought it off them. And now we are the organization that deals with teams, run by a team that benefits from the organ. It's a wonderful thing to be part of. It really is. So that's what I mean by we are a team company. We truly are. But teamwork is difficult. Putting together teams is difficult. Maintaining teams is hard. And there isn't just, as I said, a one fix for this. It's something that should be ongoing. Teams are fluid. The environment in which they work is fluid. Objectives change. So what we need to do is make sure that we don't just think, right, we've formed a high-performing team, off we go. We have to make sure that we keep at it. It's an ongoing process. For those that know me, will know that it's a pet peeve of mine that people say, I've done Belbin. And I say, but you don't do something. It's an ongoing process. Have people change? If their experiences change, if different people come into the team, out of the team, and what are your objectives? What about the leader of the team? Has that changed? There's so much that remains fluid when we work with teams. We need to make sure it's an ongoing process. Okay, so teamwork, high-performing teams, putting them together using Belbin. This is what we're going to be discussing. Please do interact in the comments. It would be great to see you. Let's go to this slide here. As I said, we've been talking about teams for years, and this was taken from the foreword of Management Teams, Why They Succeed or Fail, which was the seminal book written by Dr. Meredith Belbin, which was published back in 1981. And the late Anthony Jay gave the foreword for that. It's a really old book. Look at that. It's brilliant. Pictures on the back. Look at Meredith. Oh, those were the days. Anyway, Anthony Jay was asked to present the foreword, to write the foreword for the book. And after reading through the book and understanding what it is that we do here at Belbin, he very succinctly put it that it is not the individual, but the team that is the instrument of sustained and enduring success. It's not about having an organization full of brilliant individuals. The key thing is how those individuals work together to create this concept of a team, and the team is going to be more effective. I mean, there's been so much research recently. I just put my glasses on. I used to be able to remember these quotes, but I'm getting old. There was a great bit of research done by EY, and they discovered that almost 9 out of 10 companies agreed that the problems confronting them are now so complex that teams are essential to provide effective solutions. In addition, an overwhelming majority of respondents think that their organization's ability to develop and manage teams will be essential for their future competitiveness. Teams are crucial. They are that crucial link between strategy and success. They really are. But many of us don't spend time looking at what teams need. Very often we say, right, this is the team, off you go. We don't spend enough time with the team right at the outset to ensure that the team has everything it needs to be successful. What is a high performing team? We talk about high performance, don't we? It's a bit of an interesting one. Performance. What does that actually mean? Well, interestingly, if you Google what is a high performing team, you come up with millions of responses. That normally means that there's quite a lot written on the subject, which means it's usually something which is at the forefront of people's minds. So, a high performing team in this context is a group of skilled individuals who are selected to work together to meet a common objective and share responsibility for outcomes. I think that's a critical bit, that last bit there, is that shared responsibility. It's not up to an individual for the team to succeed. It's shared amongst everybody who is within and takes part with that team. It's quite a critical element. There's other things you could add to that, to be fair. I'd also say it's a small number of a small amount of people. It's not a massive group. A team should be under about 8. But we can add to that, and therefore the definition just gets longer and more unwielding. But there are other bits that we could add to that. One could say, I like that, Ben. Thank you. So I'm looking here. I'm already distracted. Isn't that the same for all teams? I think it is, Ben, but I don't think it's that shared responsibility. It's always the same for teams. People have a responsibility for their input, but not necessarily for the outcomes generally. But yeah, the definitions they change. It depends where you get them from. But what does a high performing team need? Well, they need to have a shared value, shared vision. They need to have a why. What is it that we're doing? Why are we doing what we're doing? And most importantly, those shared values and visions need to be understood and shared by all. We'll come back to that later. They also need to foster trust and psychological safety. But you can't start with that. You need to build the team first before you can start allowing that trust and psychological safety to happen. People need to understand their role within the team. They need to have those relationships in the team, and they need to understand what it is that they are there to provide for the team. And then that trust can really start to be built. There needs to be effective and open communication and collaboration. That needs to be valued by everybody within the team. The team also needs to be adept at problem solving and also possess complementary skills which enable diverse perspectives and approaches. This is what a high performing team does. It has diversity within it. That means we're not just thinking along the same lines, the same track, so to speak. And they also consistently deliver outstanding results. So not just a one-off, there's a consistency. Now, whatever your metric for high performance, all teams have the potential to perform better given the right tools. So if you give your team the tools that they need to become higher performing, the more chance they are to actually achieve that. So where should we start? Let's start right at the beginning here. A lovely picture of Meredith. The merits of a team should never be assessed without considering its purpose. And this requires clarity. It requires time spent up front. Because sometimes without that clarity, the team is just set up to fail from the first instance. It's not just its purpose, it's its timelines, it's its stakeholders, who needs to be involved, how are you being measured? There are so many elements here that need to be really nailed down before you even start assembling the team. Because if you haven't got that sorted to start with, how do you know who you need within the team? I'm just being distracted again now, Danny. Hi, let me read yours. If we have individuals with the right skills aligned to shared vision, work and so, do they even need a leader? Oh, that's a beautiful question. We'll come back to that. Meredith, with his research, I'll talk about it now. Meredith and his research, and also, oh, which book is it? Katzenbach and Smith, The Wisdom of Teams. They say that the truly high performing team has shared leadership. There isn't just one leader, and everybody feels comfortable to lead as and when appropriate. And I think, is that where we're going? I suppose that would be the high point, wouldn't it, when it came to high performing teams? Is, do they have truly shared leadership within, or are they still dependent upon one leader? But no, the idea is a truly high performing team shares that leadership role. So thank you for asking that, Daniel. I think that's a really, really good question. But really does depend on where the team is at the time. And going back to what I said right at the very beginning, teams are fluid. They're very rarely static. They'll be coming across different challenges, different problems, different stakeholders, different people coming in and out throughout. So as the team is fluid and changing and reactive, then so the leadership should be as well. Some people are better at certain stages of teamwork than others in that leadership role. But it's that joint responsibility which is the key area here, isn't it? I think that's what we'd say. Great to see the discussion going on. I might have to turn my comments off, otherwise I'm never going to get to the end here. But thank you so much. I really enjoy seeing that people are interacting. Anyway, where was I? That's right. Have your purpose. Get that nailed down right at the very beginning. Now, I know we're talking about forming high performing teams, but I'd just like to share an exercise that we run with existing teams. And I'm sure you've done the same. I'm sure I'm going to tell you exercises that you already do. But one of them is that you can work with a team, and before you do anything with them, is ask them to write down on a post-it note what the objective, what the purpose of the team is. Get them to write it down. Then put it all on a flip chart or a wall or what have you, and compare and contrast. I've yet to see or work with a team where everybody is in agreement that they know exactly what the team is there to achieve. And that is the debate you need to start with, because you can't work with anything else unless everybody is on the same page there. Now, it could be that team is very clear about what it is that their purpose is. The next thing I would say is get them to write down on a post-it, do they know what their contribution is to the team? What is required of them personally to ensure that the team succeeds and fulfills its purpose? That sometimes is a bit more of a tricky question. So that's something else that you could do when working with teams that perhaps already formed, is checking, do they understand the purpose? And do the individuals in the team understand what they need to give to the team to make sure that that purpose is met? So two lovely little exercises there. It starts the conversation. It starts the dialogue within the team, which is what we need. Going back again, we need that open communication. We need collaboration. And that's a wonderful way of starting that dialogue happening. Okay, so I'm just going to close comments for a sec because I'm getting distracted. That's better. So it needs a purpose. And then what we need to do is we need to understand what types of behavior do we need within the team. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about Belbin theory here. So once you really know what the purpose of the team is, how it's being measured, etc., you have to think of what types of behavior do we need within the team. So for those of you who are less familiar, Belbin Team Roles came about after 9 years of research at Henley Management College back in the 1960s and 1970s. Over 200 teams were analysed, were watched over whilst they played a game, a day-long game. And why did that happen? Well, because Meredith Belbin and his team were invited to Henley because Henley found that during some of their management courses, some of their courses that they're there for managers who were earmarked for the higher echelons of management and leadership in large organisations, is that how they learned when they were at Henley is they learned by syndicate working. They're the first European business school to work by syndicate working as opposed to lectures. And they noticed that within these syndicates, some worked a lot better than others, and they couldn't quite work out why, because all of these managers were already very successful people in their own right. So how come when you put some successful managers together, they work brilliantly, and some didn't? They couldn't work it out. So they got Meredith Belbin and his team to analyse and to find out what was it that made some teams work really well and some teams work less well. So over 9 years, they analysed and analysed. They came up with hypotheses and then they disproved them. So first of all, they put all of the people who were really high intellect together, because they said that must be it. For a team to be successful, you need all the high intellect people together. And no, they didn't. In fact, those teams weren't very successful at all. They looked at personalities, putting similar personalities together. Would that work? No, it didn't. So they had all of this data. And eventually, after a lot of trial and error, after observing people every 30 seconds whilst they were playing these business games, whilst having data on their IQ, on their values, on their personality, having all of this data, they started to form a picture of 9 distinct clusters of behaviour which were needed for a team to be successful. Not 9 people, 9 clusters of behaviour, each one called a team role. And they found that the most successful teams had access to all of these 9 team roles at some point throughout the duration of the exercise. So we're not saying you need all 9 at the same time, and we're going to go on to that a bit later. But we're saying what we do need to know is where these behaviours are. And of course, depending on the purpose of the team will depend on which team roles are going to come to the fore and which ones are going to be needed perhaps later on. How many do we need more than, some behaviours more than others? It's really important to start with that why. It helps to inform the behaviours that you need. A very, very brief overview. We have 9 clusters of behaviour. We have 9 team roles. Up in the top there, we have the resource investigator in pink. The resource investigator behaviour is one who's opportunistic, enthusiastic, outgoing, knows everybody, great at negotiating, is always turning over every stone to see if there's an opportunity there. They're never in the office. They're always out doing stuff. So they're their strengths. They also have what we call an allowable weakness, the flip side of a coin, so to speak. And that allowable weakness for the resource investigator is the fact that they get really bored, and sometimes they neglect following people up. But that's okay, because they wouldn't have those strengths without those weaknesses. It's just as long as they don't over creep into what we call the non-allowable weaknesses is the key point. So they're bringing ideas which are borrowed from outside in. The other ideas role is that of a plant. And the plants are the ones that are coming up with original ideas, coming up with many, 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 many ideas. Not all of them are any good. But they're the ones who are thinking differently to everybody else. They're great problem solvers. Their allowable weakness is sometimes they can, not communicate properly because so much is going on here. They can't get the words out sometimes. So there we have those 2 wonderfully creative roles within a team. So if your team's purpose is to look at things differently, is to problem solve, you need to make sure you have people who are strong with these behaviours in the team. We then have the monitor evaluator. Now, the monitor evaluator is one that takes the emotion out of the decision-making process, weighs up the pros and cons, looks at all of the available data, and makes the right decision. Their allowable weakness is that sometimes they're not the most inspirational, but you're not wanting them to be inspirational. You're wanting them to be right, and you dismiss your monitor evaluator at your peril. We then have the specialist role, and the specialist role are people who have the deep dive into a particular subject area. They have a love of learning. They just want to get to the bottom of everything they do because they just see the richness in the depth of understanding. Their allowable weakness is sometimes they're so focused down here, they don't see the bigger picture. We then have the implementer role, and the implementer role is one who's organised, practical, loves a spreadsheet, is very loyal, is very hardworking. Their allowable weakness is sometimes they're a bit resistant to change because if everything works, why change it? You've got a process, why change the process? We then have the completer finisher, and the completer finisher is a perfectionist, the one that checks, and checks again, has a little bit of that anxiety to make sure that everything is right. Their allowable weakness is sometimes they're not great at delegating. Why should they? Nobody can do as good a job as them. The shaper, again, has a little bit of anxiety there because they're the ones who are driving forward. They're the ones who are pushing down boundaries, getting the timelines correct, and the ones that are bringing the energy to make sure that they achieve, make sure that the team achieves, sorry. Their allowable weakness is sometimes they can upset people. And that's because they see it as a task, not people, not feelings. We then have the coordinator, which along with the shape is quite a dominant role. And the coordinator is the conductor of an orchestra. And they are the ones that see the bigger picture. They recognize and use the talents of everybody around. They bring everybody in because they know what the music's meant to sound like. And they know how everybody can contribute to that. Allowable weakness, sometimes you wonder what they're doing because they're so good at delegating. They've suddenly got their feet up on the desk and a cup of tea in hand. And then we have the team worker, and the team worker behavior is the one who has wonderful listening ability, the ones who've got wonderful empathy, and they care about you as an individual. They are the gel that keeps the team together. Their allowable weakness is sometimes they can be a bit indecisive because they don't always want to choose one over another. So we know that these 9 clusters of behavior are needed for a team to be successful, but they're not always needed all of the time, but they are needed somewhere. And again, depending on what the purpose of the team is there to do, will depend which of these team roles are going to come to the fore. Okay. So what each team needs is a balance between the people's team roles, their behavior, what they do, not who they are. So Belbin doesn't measure your personality. It measures your behavior, what people actually see and interact with. And what we need is a team to be a perfect balance between these behavioral roles, these team roles, and your functional roles. And your functional roles is your job description, it's your skills that you've been brought in, it's your job title, so to speak. So the ideal blend obviously will depend on the goals and the tasks that the team faces. We again going back to that flexibility here, which is really important. So we need a wonderful blend between both your functional and your team roles. Okay, right, lost my place now. I got distracted earlier by looking at the chat. I'm trying not to go in there at the moment. So how do we get this information? Well, we need data. Back with Meredith and his team back at Henley, we need to find data about individuals, and it starts with the individual reports, the Belbin individual reports, so people can work out and understand their contributions to the team from a behavioural point of view, that team role element. How do they do that? Well, they complete an online questionnaire called the Self-Perception Inventory. It's all online. We're on our 8th version of the reports and the calculations and the algorithms and fairy dust to produce these reports. And the individual have an idea of how they see themselves, what they think the behaviours are that they can contribute towards the team. We can also put all that data together. There's so much we can do, but we need the data from the individuals first to really understand how to put people together. And if you had this at your fingertips, wouldn't that be marvelous? When you have a need, this is the objective, I need to get the right people in here, this is critical. Within the platform called Interplace, where you can get all these reports from, you can actually search for people depending on their top team roles, how strong they are in each of those team roles. You may be able to find people you hadn't thought of who will be able to represent that particular team role well within the team. So you start with the individual. How do they see their strengths using the self-perception inventory and the subsequent reports that are there so that you can understand what the contributions are? But with Belbin, it's a bit different. It's not just based on your self-awareness. I read a paper recently, and the statistic was that although most of us think we're quite self-aware, only about 15% of us actually are. Why is that? It's because we think we're really good at questioning why we do things. We think we're really good at having that that look within ourselves, when in fact we're not great. We don't really know what questions to ask ourselves. And what they talk about is having a mix between self-awareness and also getting feedback from others. It's so critical to understand how other people see you, how other people value you. It helps inform, it makes you a better leader as well if you understand the influence and the impact you have on other people. So at Belbin, what we say is you fill in the self-perception inventory. And then you ask for feedback from others that know you well. If it's already an intact team, it'll be people within that team that you're already working with. Because again, it's relatively situational. And they are sent a questionnaire. It's just one page and it's full of words. And they tick the words that they think apply most to you. So what we're doing here is we're getting an updated report after we have at least 4 observers feeding back, so that you understand not only how you see yourself, but how others see you. And that's crucial information. Why is that crucial information? Because we don't want people on the team who feel that they're really strong in one position where in fact they're not. Because that's not benefiting the team from this. If somebody's saying, yeah, I'm a really high plant, we need to back that up. The team needs that to be true. The team needs to have that endorsed, validated by other people who know that person well. Because if you're going, yeah, absolutely, we see all those plant attributes there. They are a strong plant and they can contribute mainly at that beginning stage when we have that problem solving to start with. That's where that person needs to make the most impact. Whereas if somebody was a high plant, but actually people weren't seeing that and they'd gone onto the team just on their self awareness or what they thought they were, the team is going to suffer because actually it's not validated. They may not be a strong plant. We see it all the time. We get feedback from organisations we work with, and they've perhaps had some team building sessions, and sometimes, yes, I'm a purple, and everybody's sort of going, oh, that inward groan. They know they're not a purple. They shouldn't be a purple. Oh, what's the point of doing this? Because, we're just kidding ourselves of where our strengths are. So it's so important to have this validation. And you can validate behavior because it's what you do. Belbin is not the noun of who you are. It's the verb of what you do. It's a doing word. So people can see it, they can interact with it, and they can feed back on it, which is really, really important. Has anybody else worked with the team when somebody goes, oh yeah, I come up with all the ideas, or yeah, I'm really, really organized, I can do that. And you go, yeah, but you're not really. You want to be able to give that feedback because you also want that individual to grow. Because you're not just saying, no, you're not. You're saying, actually, we don't see those strengths. What we see are these strengths. And this is where we really need you to concentrate because that's where the benefit is going to come from. And that individual can then reflect upon this and they can learn and they can grow. Because that's what other things teams should do, is they should learn and grow and develop. Going back to that constant change element about them being fluid. Okay, I'm just going to give you a couple of examples of what I've just said, really. So here we have John Yellow. Now, John, I'm going to tell you because the slide's quite small. Let me put my glasses on. John is saying that they see themselves as a really strong resource investigator, shaper, implementer. There's virtually nothing in that sort of I can sort of do manageable roles, and then everything else seems to be in the least preferred roles. So in theory, we'd really want John to be in that resource investigator, shaper, implementer role. That's where the team needs them to be. Feedback from other people. So they've ticked all these words. Now, some of those words relate to those strengths and some of them to those weaknesses. We're talking about the flip side of the coin. So yes, people are seeing the resource investigator and the shaper and the implementer, but they're also seeing a few of those negatives as well. Not too much, but let's just go a bit further to see what else those reports are, what else information they're giving. So yes, the shaper is very similar, but actually the observers don't see as much resource investigator in John as John sees in themselves. They don't see as much implementer as John sees in themselves. Well, what does this mean? Well, instead of John going, I'll play the resource investigator role, that's my contribution to the team, there could be somebody else who has it stronger, which is more validated by people within the team. It's a complex thing, isn't it? We need to talk about these things. We need to discuss and work out. The other interesting thing here is that all of those words, you can see what people have ticked. So again, although John has a very high shaper and everybody's seeing that, they're seeing a bit of confrontational there. They're seeing a little bit of impatience, being a bit challenging, being a bit outspoken. Now, some of these are great, but is there going to be a slight, are people really going to listen if perhaps that confrontational comes out a bit too much? So John, let's have some development. Let's work out how we can lessen that confrontational element that people are seeing. This is giving you so much interest and so much knowledge and depth within these reports that help you when you're putting those teams together? Is there somebody who has also high shaper along with John, but perhaps some of those words are lower down? There's all this data that you have at your fingertips that can help inform the best decision making when putting your teams together. So it's not just about finding out your team roles. It's not just finding out what are the behaviors that people need within the team to be successful and then allocating, because not everybody's required at the same time. And we're often required to put different hats on at different times, depending on what the team is there to do, depending on what the team is there to achieve. In a high performance team, each player knows when and where to exit. You need to know when you're making that contribution. Timing is important. Indispensable for this context is the knowledge the players have of one another. So it's like a play, isn't it, without anybody knowing what the other parts are. And you're just there on the stage. You need to know what your part is in part of that play, when you're in the wings, when you're coming in, when everybody else is. Where does the interaction take place? I'll give you an example here. We worked with an organisation in London, and they're a creative organisation, and they used to work in project teams. And they came to us because their project teams were okay, but they were taking longer and longer and longer to get to the end point. And also they're getting not massively large staff turnover, but it was beginning to increase a little bit. They didn't think people were as engaged as they should be. So what they did with their projects is they worked out which behaviours were required and at which times. So they put together something similar to the slide I'm showing you now, and they said, right, we have this idea stage, just when we just think how can we really fit the brief that's been given to us by our client. Let's have some ideas. And then they required the plant and resource investigator. They're two different types of ideas to come in. Then they need to evaluate the ideas. They need to work out which of those ones they're going to choose to go forward. And that's when they need that monitor evaluator behavior. Now, where they were falling down is that actually at this next part, the implementation, where they just need to put things in process and it's all about, well, implementing. They need the implementer, the organized one, and also the completer, finisher, the detailed one to do that. But what was happening is those ideas were coming back in, because everybody was doing everything all of the time, and they're having so many discussions around the around the whole point of, oh, I've got another idea. Oh, what about this? Let's do something different. And in fact, they just kept going around in this, this loop that never finished. So what they found was if they told those people who had the plant and resource investigator behavior, they didn't require that behavior anymore. What we required was a different behavior. It allowed them to go and work with a different team or to put a different hat on. They found that they needed their coordinator behavior to coordinate the whole project, work out who was using which behaviors they needed and when. The shaper behavior was required as and when timelines started to, get a little bit loose, and they needed to get some energy in. They had the team worker for when the team wasn't gelling, and they needed somebody in there to be the sort of like the human oil to keep the team working, and the specialist when they needed a deep dive into a particular subject area. And by doing this, they managed to get those project timelines down, and also they managed to ensure that they had far less turnover. In fact, their engagement went up. So this is a wonderful demonstration of they had a really clear why, because they were briefed by the client. They then said, right, what team roles do we need? Well, we know we need all 9 team roles. They got everybody Belbined, and then they allocated the right people to the right parts of the project at the right time. Everybody knew who was meant to be in at which parts, and everybody knew what was expected of one another. It is really important. Not everybody's required at the same time. Everybody needs to understand what their contribution is. The skills of the players are important, but the strength of the team depends on how well the players combine. I see many, many articles, we have plenty of our own, talking about psychological safety, talking about trust within a team and how critical it is. And it's all based on the Google study, which said, out of all of our teams, what makes some of them work really well, and psychological safety really came up there. Are you dependable? Do you do what you say you're going to do? Do you feel that you can take risk? Do you feel that everybody's got you, they're supportive? So on and so forth. So psychological safety is really critical. And it starts, I think, here. The skills of the player are important, but the strength of the team depends on how well the players combine. How well does everybody not just know each other within the team, but knows their strengths and their weaknesses? How happy are they to talk about those strengths and weaknesses? How do they share those? One exercise that we recommend people do when they're putting a team together, or even when the team's already formed and you just need to inject something to make them higher performing, is everybody has their Belbin reports, and everybody works in pairs. And the first person has 2 minutes to talk about their report, talk about their strengths and their weaknesses, what work they prefer to do and not, what their observers see. Give them 2 minutes to talk to the other person. And the other person has to listen without wanting to reply, listen with an appreciative ear. They then have a minute to then feed back and start a conversation. Then the other person has 2 minutes to talk about themselves. And what you're starting to do is this whole idea of contracting between one another. What do I need from you? What do you need from me? How can we work closely together? Because we need to do this because the team is dependent upon the relationships within the team to be successful. Now, we recommend you do this. It doesn't have to be in a workshop environment. It could just be recommended over a coffee, or have a Zoom or what have you. But what you're trying to do is develop those relationships within the team, and that's where the psychological safety comes in. You're getting to know people better. You're getting to understand their viewpoint. You're getting to understand differences. This is also where you can start looking at conflict. So these behaviors are all very different. We need all 9 of them, but they're very 9 different behaviors, and some of them are very different from one another. So we have the resource investigators always starting new things, going out, trying new stuff. And there's a completed finisher just desperately trying to finish something to a really high standard. They're seeing things from very different viewpoints. We see this a lot within teams, is when we have conflict between that resource investigator, completed finisher. Won't you just finish something before you go on to the next thing? Oh, why did you look at the detail? Look at all of the opportunity that's outside. Look at all the things that we could be doing. What's wonderful is having that information so that they can have an open dialogue and discussion about their differences and how they're going to make sure that that doesn't mean that the team doesn't achieve its objectives. That's really important. So spend time on those individual relationships, then spend time as a team. Get everybody standing around. Another exercise we really recommend is having the icons around the room. The team role icons. Everybody stands at their top role. Okay, we're a whole mixture of all 9, aren't we? But so you stand by your top, and then you get everybody to say what you need from everybody, each of the team roles, to be able to do your work and for the team to be able to benefit from that. So you can't start contracting on a one-to-one, then you can start having that contract together as a team, because it's the team that's going to be measured. It's the team's output that you need. So you need everybody on that team to be working to the best of their abilities and understanding where their contribution is and how to support everybody within the team to be able to do that. I've seen a couple of questions coming in. I'm going to go to those at the end if that's okay. Now, how do you do that? How do you get those conversations going? Well, I said before that once you have that individual data, you can do some beautiful things with it. You can create these team reports, and these reports, you choose the people who you think you might want in your team, or perhaps you already got in your team, and you can immediately see where the gaps are and where the overlaps are. These are just a starter for 10, however. These are they start a conversation. So with this example here, we have nobody in the team worker segment. We have nobody in the coordinator segment. Nobody is at a top 2. Does that matter? I don't know. It depends what the team's there to do, doesn't it? It could be that as long as somebody has it as a 3rd, 4th role that we need to go to it occasionally, that's fine. But it starts the conversation. We've got quite a lot of people there in that implementer segment. They all need to be there. If this is a team that's being put together for coming up with ideas, do you need all of that implementer right there? Because the implementer is going to get annoyed because they're just looking practically whether or not these ideas will work. Maybe they need to take their hats off and see if they've got any more resource investigator plant there to start with. It depends what the team is there to achieve, which is why it's so important to concentrate on the first bit. But you could have got this information within the team reports, or you can use a flip chart. I love my flip chart with my sticky pads. And again, it's a way of getting that team talking. The essence of a team is a set of players who have a reciprocal part to play and who are dynamically engaged with one another. Again, that's so important to understand the roles that everybody is there to play and that everybody is engaged and understands that. So after you've worked with a team for a while, you should be able to repeat the exercise. What is your responsibility in the team? What's your individual input? What does the team need you to do? Everybody should have real clarity on that. What does Joe require of Tracy when they're working together? What does Vicky need when they're working with Stuart? We can work this out and we can ensure that we have that engagement with people within the team. There's more information here again within the team reports. You can start really looking at the culture of the team. Does the culture of the team, this is looking at the averages for each of those 9 behaviours, does the culture of the team fit what the team is there to do? Is this team here looking at process? Is it looking at detail? Is it checking that things are going in the right direction? Does it require analytical abilities? Because if it does, brilliant. The overall culture of the team is showing that. If it's not, then we need to start questioning, do we have the right behaviours in the team? I love tree team of, I can't say it, tree team of 7. What you can do here is look at the average compared to the highest percentile for that particular team role within the team. And this helps again with the succession planning. What is if somebody was to leave? So for example, on that plant role, which is on right at the end there, there's a really relatively low average and that one person is carrying that. That's P plant. For that team, if that person was to go, seconded to another team, maybe off sick or etc., what would happen? There's a big gap between the individual and the average. It means that that person's carrying that role quite a bit for the team. You need to be aware of that. You don't want to be too dependent just on 1 or 2 people. But what you are looking for a really high performing team is people who aren't just, oh, that's my top role. They need to be a strong example of the type. They need to be the best shaper, the best plant, the best whatever that the team needs them to be. And the team needs to support individuals to do that as well. So what we're saying a strong example is over the 80th percentile or higher. Everybody within the team needs to learn and grow and develop. Why? Because the team needs them to do. How do they do that? With the support of the team, because everybody understands why. It really is high performing teams. So how do you use Belbin to form high performing teams? You start at the beginning. You start with the objective. What is the team needed to do? What is its purpose? What is its why? The longer you can spend here, the more everything else will fall into place. Which team roles are needed? We know we need all 9, but we may not need them all of the time, and we may need some team roles more than others. Then back to the individual. Who would best take on each team role? Find out by using those individual reports. Get the feedback from other people so that it's actually validated. That's so crucial. And then ensure everybody understands the roles the team needs them to play. It's a mix of their functional role and their team role. Functional role and team role, the role that the team requires them to play. But it's no good them keeping it to themselves. They need to know the roles of everybody else. They need to support one another and they need to grow. They need to learn. They need to understand when they're centre stage and when perhaps they're more in the wings. They need to know when they're playing which role, because all of us can play definitely more than one. So in a nutshell, objective, which team roles are needed, who is best to take on each, ensure that people understand that and the roles of other people, and for the team to be supportive, have that joint responsibility. Crikey, I've been speaking for a long time, 43 minutes according to my watch. It sounds really simple, I think, on the webinars. I listen to our webinars a lot and say, oh, that sounds really simple, but it's not, is it? Because human beings are complex, organizations are complex, teams are most definitely complex. What we want to do is help support you make a difference to your teams. The best way of doing that is to understand all about Belbin and how that can be added to what you're already doing, which I'm sure is fabulous. Like I said, teamwork and putting together high-performing teams, my goodness, there is so much involved. Belbin can help to give you that common language and understanding of difference, appreciating and understanding difference when it comes to behaviors, because we know that all of those behaviors are required for the team to be successful. Things need to keep going over and over. Doing Belbin is not a point. It's never done. So please contact us if you would like to be able to really put on a accredited guru hat, have a certificate to hang on the wall, to be able to use Belbin really well within your organization and to help your teams. And please just get in contact with us, because we're a team here. We've got high teamwork. If you're to do the average, we're really high team workers, so we really do want to help. Please give us a bell, or just write an email. We'd be delighted to hear from you. So, in summary, using Belbin to form high-performing teams. It's difficult, it can be done, and most importantly, it needs to be done, because we know that teamwork is crucial. It is the link between strategy and success. Let us help you use Belbin with your teams. Now, that's my bit done. I'm now going to open up the comments again, because it got a bit mad and I got a bit distracted. I do apologise. Thank you, Tracy, for putting Ben's on there. How might the approach of categorising individuals into specific roles as a way to simplify team dynamics influence the effectiveness tackling complex or challenging problems? How do you mean by that, Ben? Can you give me a little bit more detail? Would be really interesting. Do you mean that if you put people in a box, you might actually take them out of where they need to be? How often okay, and adding okay. How often do teams have the deep heart over time to do you know, Ben? Not enough. Not enough. If you talk to people, I spoke to somebody the other day who was he was in a very high performing sports team, and they spend 90% of their time training as a team to be a team. They spend 10% of their time playing. Is that what we do when we're with high performing teams? We don't, do we? We just do. We just get on with. I think the longer and the more time we can spend working out and discussing how we're working together as a team, everything else should be a little bit more easier. So I don't think we do spend enough time talking about. We say we do it at the beginning, off we go. You're a team now. We've got our Belbin profiles or whatever we're doing. Blah blah blah. Off we go. We'd recommend keep checking in. Keep checking in on a regular basis. Are people making the contributions they need to be making? If not, why not? Who else can make it? How can the team support that happening? Somebody's left. There's so much that needs to be constantly talked about. So I really think that they have a weekly or every 2 weeks check in, not necessarily on what work's been done, but how is everybody interacting and working together as a team. Really, really important. It's not done enough, Ben. It's often an infrequent evaluation, and that's a shame. And I think that's why so many people groan when they hear that they've got to work in a team. I've got so many bits of paper in front of me, it's unreal. But there's a great survey done. I say great, that's actually not the right word. It was complete, what do you call it, clickbait. And it was done by Forbes. And they looked at America's most hated office jargon. And interestingly, the first phrase, which was in the top 10 of the hated jargon, was synergy. Nobody really likes the word synergy, do they? And then you've had things like touch base and raising the bar, etc. The second thing was teamwork, because it's a phrase that, one, is overused, but two, it's a phrase because we don't spend enough trying to help people work effectively as a team. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. David, I was thinking about using the icons on the Belbin wheel on meeting invites so everybody knew why they're invited and have the right mindset. And I love that. I think that's a brilliant idea, David. I really do. And it's understanding what is the contribution that you are needed to make at the time, isn't it? That is wonderful. Crikey. You know you're getting old when you say a few years ago, you realise it was 12 years ago. I was in New Zealand and we were launching the 7th version of the reports. We're now on the 8th version of the reports. And our distributors in New Zealand sat me down. It was lovely. And they had lots of their customers telling us how they'd used Belbin and the successes that they'd had. And there's a large organisation, I can't remember, I think they were I think they were the telephone industry or something like that, communications, comms. And they just embraced Belbin. And what they did is they had a team circle. You can't see this, can you? It's just 1 second. They had a team circle on every meeting room wall. So before they went into any meeting, they used to talk about their team role. So before we start the meeting, everybody put their top team roles, or however they want to describe it. They immediately understood if it's going to be an over-talkative meeting, what do they need to do? If it's going to be something that actually they didn't have all the data and it was very ME focused, what were they going to do? They used it to inform the meeting. Have we got the right people here? And if they haven't and there was no choice, how are we going to make sure that our RI doesn't overrun? How are we going to make sure that our team worker doesn't mean that we're indecisive? They cut meeting times by 50%. And I just think, wow, by doing this, and it's exactly what you're saying, isn't it? Knowing what is expected really does help those teams work better together. Thank you. I think that's a brilliant idea. Not only are you being invited, but you're being told because you need to play this role, and this role. This is what we're after right now. Fabulous. Okay, William, thank you. Oh, I agree. Unfortunately, these exercises tend to be one-off exercises. Very rarely do teams continue. I know, and that's a shame. It really is. And if it's just normally seen when there's an issue, isn't there, where there's a problem, oh, we better do something with the team. I think we need to empower our teams to be able to constantly review how they are working, how they're meeting their objectives, and spending time on those dynamics as a team. They shouldn't be one-off exercises, is basically what I'm trying to say. If the team really knows what they're there to achieve, if the team knows, well, I can't repeat the whole webinar, but yeah, I agree, William. They're not done regularly enough. They should be. Maybe it's the team's responsibility to try and do that. How can we help the teams do that? How can we help the teams realize that they need to constantly be looking and reviewing? How does a team balance the talk activity about team with the need to do work? Why do we separate the work from the team, one would argue? God, this could be a really philosophical question and discussion. Surely understanding how you're working as a team is work itself. I spoke about this very briefly at the Institute of Leadership when they were launching their latest L&D future report. And we often see them as two distinct things, don't we? Learning and work. Surely they should both be together. You shouldn't see one without the other. They should be entwined at all times. No, Ben, you're quite right. Sadly, it's not. And I think this is our challenge. This is our challenge to help teams to think that taking a little bit of time to understand the dynamics between them is actually going to benefit the team in the long run. Because if you look at those high performing teams, and we work with some, that's exactly what they do. They take time out. They not take time out. They take time to look at themselves as a team, and they constantly review. Yeah, marginal gains of some traction. If we just do it once more than they normally do, we can do it gradually. It doesn't have to be a big culture change all at once, but we can help teams realize that that's what they need to do. God, good questions. Thank you so much for our interaction. If you would like to continue the conversation at any time, please do team@belbin.com, joe@belbin.com, or just pick up the phone. Ben, thank you. William, thank you. David, thank you for your contributions. It's been great to hear from you. I've got to go and do some work now. So what I'm going to do is say thank you so much to everybody for attending today. The recording will be with you apparently automatically after I press the end stream button. And come and join us for another webinar again very soon. Thank you very much.